In the grand tales of Japan's Sengoku period, the names of mighty daimyo and fearless warriors dominate the scrolls of history. We imagine armored men clashing on open battlefields, banners waving, swords gleaming in the sun. Yet behind those visible struggles, another war was quietly unfolding. It was a war fought not with armies, but with whispers. Not with banners, but with secrets. And at its heart stood a peculiar kind of samurai, one who walked in both honor and shadow. The Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states, stretched across the 15th and 16th centuries, a time when Japan was fractured into dozens of rival domains. Warlords vied for supremacy, alliances shifted like sand, and even the most powerful daimyo could be toppled overnight by betrayal. Victory often depended not only on skill in battle, but on information, knowledge of an enemy's movements, their supply routes, their loyalties. To gather such intelligence, samurai were sometimes asked to put aside the rigid expectations of Bushido, the warrior's code, and enter a murky world of deception. These were the shadow warriors. To outsiders, they resembled shinobi, the covert operatives we now call ninja. But unlike shinobi, who were often recruited from the lower classes, these men were true samurai, sworn by blood and status to their lords. Their task was dangerous, not only because of the missions themselves, but because of the shame they carried. To live by deception was to stray from the path of honor. To wear disguises, to eavesdrop, to strike unseen, these acts contradicted the ideals of open combat and loyalty. And yet the shadow samurai endured. They served as spies, saboteurs, and secret messengers. They disguised themselves as monks, merchants, or peasants, slipping unnoticed into villages and fortresses. They memorized guard patterns, spread false rumors, and delivered coded messages under the cover of night. Their work could decide the outcome of wars, though their names were rarely recorded. This is the story of one such day, seen through the eyes of a shadow warrior. It is a day of meditation and disguise, of risk and paranoia, of small choices that could alter the course of entire battles. A day lived on the knife's edge, between honor and dishonor, between loyalty and secrecy. A day in the life of a samurai who walked the path of shadows. The first light of dawn filters through the paper shoji screens of a modest residence hidden within a provincial town. Though his duties are unlike those of his comrades on the battlefield, the shadow samurai begins his day no differently than any other warrior. He kneels before a small kamidana shrine, bowing his head in reverence to the kami, the spirits that watch over his life. His hands are steady as he lights a thin stick of incense, the faint trail of smoke curling upward like a whisper. For a man who will soon wear masks and disguises, this ritual is not superstition, it is grounding. It is the tether that reminds him who he truly is, when deception threatens to blur his identity. After prayers, he dons a simple kimono and sits cross-legged upon a straw tatami mat. In the silence of the early morning, he practices meditation, focusing on breath and posture. The discipline of stillness is as important as the discipline of the blade. A warrior of shadows must quiet his own mind, for in the tasks ahead, fear, hesitation, or nervous tics could betray him. To walk unseen requires more than skill, it requires mastery of self. When his breath has steadied and his pulse is calm, he turns to the tools of his unusual trade. Where the battlefield samurai polishes his katana, he instead inspects the items that allow him to vanish into society. A peasant's tattered robe, a straw hat worn thin at the brim, a small basket filled with herbal remedies, for today he must pose as a traveling medicine seller. These items are as vital as armor, for they protect him not from blades but from suspicion. The disguise is a second skin, one that allows him to slip past soldiers, peasants, or even rival spies without drawing notice. Yet the blade is not absent. Hidden beneath his humble garb is a short wakizashi, wrapped in cloth to muffle its sound, and a concealed dagger strapped against his thigh. Though his mission demands subtlety, violence may find him without warning. These are not weapons for open combat, but for desperate moments when silence must be kept at any cost. In his small satchel he carries writing tools, a brush, a thin strip of paper, and ink mixed with plant resin. These will serve to record enemy positions, overheard rumors, or pass messages that only his lord will understand, written in codes layered with misdirection. Before stepping outside, he carefully examines his reflection in a polished piece of bronze. He adjusts the tilt of the straw hat so that it casts a shadow across his features. His posture, too, must be altered. The proud, upright bearing of a warrior must give way to the hunched and weary carriage of a merchant who has walked for days. Every detail of his body becomes a tool in the illusion. The way he carries his basket, the slowness of his gait, even the subtle bow of his head when addressed, all must be convincing. To be unremarkable is the greatest protection he has. The sun climbs higher, and he takes a sparse meal of rice and miso broth, each bite chewed with intention. It may be the last he eats before nightfall, should his work demand swiftness and silence. The taste of the broth is earthy, grounding him in the present moment. He cannot allow himself the luxury of indulgence. The life of a shadow samurai is not about comfort, but about endurance. A full stomach slows the body just as a restless mind weakens it. Before leaving, he kneels once more at the small shrine. This time his prayer is not for himself, but for the strength to fulfill his duty, even when that duty demands acts he cannot confess. Rising, he tucks a rolled scroll into his sleeve, orders from his daimyo, written in cryptic phrases understood only by those within his circle. To others, it might look like a fragment of poetry or a prayer. In truth, it is the outline of his mission, the thread that will guide his actions for the day. When he steps into the bustling streets of the town, no one sees a samurai. They see only a wandering merchant with tired eyes, a man of little importance. His anonymity is his shield. Children run past him without notice, farmers haggle over vegetables nearby, and soldiers at the gate glance his way, but dismiss him just as quickly. He is invisible, and that is the point. To survive in the shadows, he must learn not only to hide his weapons, but to bury his identity beneath layers of disguise. In this quiet transformation, the morning has done its work. The rituals remind him of his station, the tools disguise his intent, and the prayers steady his heart. What remains is the silence of resolve. He has shed the skin of the samurai and become something else entirely, a shadow moving unseen among the living. As dawn touched the rooftops of feudal Japan, their shinobi shifted from the secrecy of night to the theater of daylight. For all their reputation as assassins in black, the day demanded a different mastery, invisibility through disguise. Where shadows had hidden their blades, now society itself became their cloak. The art of kawarimi, transformation, was at the center of this. Shinobi rarely walked about in recognizable uniforms. Instead, they became merchants, monks, farmers, or wandering performers, figures so ordinary that no one spared them a second glance. A merchant had freedom to travel, listen to gossip, and enter markets. A monk could walk into homes under the guise of blessing them. Even a humble laborer could slip past guards unnoticed. These disguises were not mere costumes. They demanded full immersion, knowledge of trade, prayers, or dialects that made the role believable. Any slip could mean exposure and death. Daylight was the time for reconnaissance. A shinobi might stand in a market stall, seemingly haggling, while quietly counting patrol routes or mapping the streets in his mind. He would note the rhythm of guard changes at a castle gate, the placement of supplies, or the flow of villagers to and from the fields. Conversations were treasures, soldiers grumbling about shortages, merchants whispering about taxes, peasants lamenting their lords. Each word was a thread in a wider net of intelligence. Even the land itself was studied with precision. Shinobi memorized which alleys gave cover, which rooftops offered vantage points, which streams could mask movement at night. A simple pile of rice sacks might be marked in his mind as a hiding place. A well might later serve as an escape route. Where others saw only the background of daily life, the shinobi saw opportunity. Operating in daylight carried risk, but it also offered advantages. The bustle of crowds meant movements blended easily. The noise of vendors and animals covered small slips. And unlike the stillness of night, where a single creak could betray an intruder, the day offered camouflage in plain sight. Yet danger always loomed. Samurai, keenly trained to spot deception, could unravel a false identity with a single sharp question. That was why patience, composure, and improvisation were as vital as any weapon. Communication during the day often took hidden forms. A monk's prayer beads might conceal a tiny scroll. A merchant's ledger could contain coded notes. Even the arrangement of rocks along a roadside could signal allies. Every gesture, every item could carry a double meaning. The shinobi world was one of layers, messages buried beneath the ordinary. Perhaps the greatest weapon of all was patience. Hours might be spent loitering in a marketplace, waiting for a glimpse of a retainer. A whole day could pass simply watching a gate, memorizing when its defenses weakened. This stillness was not wasted time. It was preparation, the slow gathering of details that would later determine success or failure. By mid-afternoon, the shinobi might have memorized an entire block of streets, recorded the mood of a town, and transmitted subtle signals to comrades. Yet to everyone around him he was no more than a weary trader or a pious monk chanting sutras. This ability to be overlooked was the essence of daylight survival. When evening finally approached, the day's mask could be discarded. The humble farmer or merchant vanished, and the true face of the shinobi returned, ready to take the secrets gathered in daylight and wield them under cover of night. In this way, sunlight was not the enemy of stealth, but its partner, offering a stage on which deception could flourish. Nightfall was when the shinobi's craft truly revealed its sharpest edge. Where the daylight demanded patience, disguise, and silent absorption of detail, The night demanded movement, decisive, exact, and mercilessly efficient. The hours of dusk were not an end but a transformation, as the intelligence gathered during the day crystallized into action. A raid was never reckless. It was a carefully orchestrated strike where every sound, every step, and every breath carried meaning. The shinobi worked in silence, not only to evade detection, but also to synchronize with his companions. Signals were often exchanged with subtle taps, bird-like whistles, or the flicker of a hand in the dark. If words were used at all, they were few, for sound was the greatest betrayer. Approach was everything. Sometimes shinobi slipped through waterways, bodies half submerged in streams that lapped at the walls of a castle. Other times they climbed rooftops, using grappling hooks or claws tied to their hands and feet. Bamboo ladders, easily carried and assembled, could be propped against walls, blending in with village scaffolding when not in use. To those within, these intrusions often seemed impossible, as if the shinobi had stepped through the fabric of the night itself. Weapons, though iconic, were not the centerpiece of the raid. Contrary to popular imagination, shinobi were not constantly throwing shuriken in flashing arcs. Such tools were distractions, not primary killers. A true shinobi favored utility, short swords that could be concealed, daggers that cut ropes or throats, and climbing spikes that doubled as weapons in close quarters. Fire, too, was a tool. A small flame in the right storehouse could cause panic and draw guards away from a target. Smoke bombs made from natural powders could blind pursuers long enough for escape. Every object carried a purpose greater than its appearance. Once inside enemy territory, the mission could vary. Assassinate a commander, steal critical documents, sabotage supplies, or create chaos to weaken morale. Each task demanded a different rhythm. An assassination required slow, careful breaths, and the steadiness of a hand that might hover over its target 4 minutes before striking. Sabotage demanded speed, planting fuses or removing key supports before vanishing into the darkness. Intelligence theft was often the most delicate, requiring a shinobi to move silently through paper-strewn rooms, unrolling scrolls by the faint glow of a hooded ember, memorizing maps before returning them to their exact positions. Failure was rarely an option. Samurai defenders, though not trained in stealth, were formidable opponents in combat. If a shinobi was discovered, escape became the mission. Tools designed for this purpose were carried at all times. Caltrops scattered behind to cripple pursuers, holloreeds for breathing underwater if hiding in rivers, or ropestide in advance to scale down walls in moments. To survive a failed raid was as much a testament to shinobi training as succeeding in the strike itself. Yet raids were not always about direct destruction. Often the mere suggestion of a shinobi presence was enough to unnerve an enemy. A single theft of a banner, the sudden disappearance of a guard captain, or unexplained sabotage could spread fear like wildfire through a garrison. Samurai, bound to honor and order, were unsettled by an enemy that fought in ways beyond their codes. For the shinobi, this psychological warfare was as valuable as blades or fire. There was also a spiritual element to these missions. Many shinobi believed they carried not only their clan's survival, but the weight of their ancestors' honor. Before setting out, some would perform brief rituals, clapping their hands softly in the dark, whispering protective prayers, or pressing talismans into their robes. For them, the night was not just a cover, but a sacred veil beneath which duty and destiny converged. The return was often more perilous than the entry. Guards might now be alert, flames lit, dogs loosed. Escape routes had to be executed flawlessly, and every second stretched long with tension. But if successful, the shinobi vanished as though swallowed by the night itself, leaving only questions and fear in their wake. To the villagers waking in the morning, nothing seemed different. The fields still stretched green, the market still bustled, and life went on. Yet within castle walls, unease spread. A lord might discover his stores of rice reduced to ashes, his commander slain in silence, or his strategies stolen without a trace. This was the shinobi's art, not open battle, but a knife in the dark, a whisper that unraveled certainty, and a presence that left no shadow when dawn broke again. When dawn rose after a night of raids, the shinobi often melted back into anonymity, returning not as celebrated warriors, but as shadows that lived among farmers, merchants, or artisans. This dual existence shaped not only their practical survival, but also the philosophy of their way of life. Unlike the samurai, whose identity was permanently bound to their swords and banners, the shinobi's strength came from adaptability. They could wear any face, adopt any role, and embody fluidity in a rigid society. At the heart of the shinobi's philosophy was pragmatism. Honor, while central to the samurai code, was not the highest virtue for the shinobi. Survival, efficiency, and the fulfillment of a mission were paramount. This does not mean that shinobi lacked principles. Rather, their morality operated within a different framework. To them, loyalty to their clan, the protection of their community, and the continuity of their people mattered more than adherence to abstract codes. If deception, disguise, or even betrayal secured survival, then such actions were not dishonorable. They were necessary. This philosophy bred resilience. Shinobi families often trained children from a young age, not only in combat and stealth, but in patience, observation, and resourcefulness. A child might spend long hours learning how to identify animal calls, memorize terrain, or walk without leaving tracks. Such training instilled the belief that mastery of the self was the foundation of mastery over one's environment. Discipline, therefore, was not rigid but flexible, teaching the shinobi to bend like bamboo in the storm rather than break like oak. Another central tenet was the use of nature as both ally and teacher. The shinobi saw forests, rivers, and mountains not merely as obstacles, but as tools. Wind could mask footsteps, rain could drown out sound, shadows became cloaks more reliable than armor. Many shinobi texts describe nature as a partner in warfare, emphasizing harmony rather than dominance. This outlook blurred the line between survival tactics and spiritual reverence, as though the earth itself was enlisted in their missions. Where samurai embodied the ideals of visibility, honor, and open confrontation, shinobi embodied the unseen currents of society. They represented the possibility that true power was not always the loudest or the most visible, but the quietest, the subtlest, and the most enduring. This contrast is partly why the shinobi became such potent figures in legend. Their philosophy challenged the cultural assumption that only direct force commanded respect. The legacy of this worldview extended far beyond the battlefield. During times of peace, many shinobi integrated their skills into ordinary life. A farmer trained in stealth might be the first to detect approaching raiders. A merchant with shinobi discipline could navigate dangerous trade routes. In this way, the shadow warriors preserved their traditions without the constant need for war. Their adaptability ensured that even in changing times, their methods did not vanish, they evolved. Psychological strength was another inheritance of their shinobi tradition. Living in the shadows meant living with uncertainty. Missions could fail, allies could betray, and enemies often outnumbered them. Yet the shinobi mindset prepared them to endure isolation, mistrust, and the burden of secrecy. This resilience, rooted in pragmatism, became a philosophy of life as much as warfare. To endure was to triumph, even if no songs were sung of it. Over centuries, the figure of the shinobi grew into myth. Storytellers embellished their feats, describing them as masters of invisibility, capable of vanishing in clouds of smoke or walking across water. While such tales stretched reality, they reflected the deeper truth of shinobi philosophy. That perception itself is a weapon. To appear more than human was, in a sense, to become more powerful than the sword-wielding samurai who faced them. Even today, the lessons of the shinobi endure. Modern societies, with their own forms of information warfare, espionage, and psychological strategy, echo many of the principles the shinobi lived by centuries ago. The idea that subtlety can defeat strength, that silence can outlast noise, remains a powerful reminder of their legacy. In the end, the shadow warriors were more than assassins or spies. They were philosophers of survival, artists of invisibility, and guardians of communities who found ways to live and fight outside the rigid codes of their age. Their philosophy whispers across history. Power does not always shout. It often waits in silence, hidden until the moment it is needed most. Few historical figures are as shrouded in mystery as the shinobi. While their existence is undeniable, the image most people conjure, the black-clad figure vanishing in smoke or scaling castle walls with ease, is largely a product of folklore, theatre, and modern media. Separating myth from reality is essential, not only to understanding who they truly were, but also to appreciating how legends shape the memory of a culture. One of the most persistent myths is the notion of the shinobi as masters of invisibility. In reality, they did not disappear into thin air, but relied on practical tricks of distraction, concealment, and timing. For example, smoke bombs were not magical devices, but rather mixtures of ash, dirt, and powder designed to obscure vision long enough for escape. In the chaos of a night raid, such tools gave the illusion of vanishing, which storytellers later exaggerated into supernatural feats. Another misconception lies in their clothing. The popular image of the all-black ninja suit, complete with hood, originates not from the shinobi themselves, but from Japanese stage theatre in the 17th century. Stagehands dressed in black to appear invisible against dark backdrops, and when these figures suddenly revealed themselves as assassins in plays, audiences associated the outfit with stealth. Historically, shinobi wore whatever allowed them to blend in: farmers' clothing, merchants' robes, or soldiers' armor. Their camouflage was cultural as much as physical. Weapons, too, are often misunderstood. Pop culture favors the iconic straight-bladed ninja sword, shuriken, and blowgun, yet shinobi relied on whatever was at hand. A short blade was practical for close quarters, but they also carried farming tools, climbing spikes, ropes, and poisons. Their greatest weapons were ingenuity and adaptability, not a standardized arsenal. Many of the so-called ninja tools depicted in movies were simple repurposed implements from everyday rural life. The myth of the lone shinobi assassin is also misleading. While some operated individually, many shinobi worked in organized groups tied to specific clans, especially in Iga and Koga provinces. These families developed sophisticated systems of intelligence gathering, sabotage, and guerrilla tactics. In times of war, they were contracted by daimyo to infiltrate castles, gather information, or spread misinformation. Far from being rogue killers, they functioned more like specialized military units or spies embedded within the politics of the era. Supernatural powers form another layer of myth. Folk tales describe shinobi who could walk on water, control animals, or summon fire at will. These stories often stemmed from exaggerated accounts of clever tricks. Using floating rafts, concealed breathing tubes, or chemical mixtures, the shinobi appeared to possess otherworldly abilities. The purpose of such stories was not just entertainment, but also psychological warfare. If an enemy believed shinobi possessed superhuman powers, fear alone could secure victory. The blending of myth and reality served an important cultural role. By the Edo period, when Japan experienced relative peace, the shinobi had already faded from prominence. In this vacuum, their image transformed into one of theater, storytelling, and later popular literature. Kabuki plays, woodblock prints, and eventually films depicted them as mysterious figures who embodied both fear and fascination. The real practices of stealth and espionage became romanticized into symbols of cunning and independence. Yet within these myths lies a kernel of truth. The shinobi did not need to literally vanish. Their mastery of psychology ensured that people believed they could. They did not require magical powers. Their ability to manipulate perception created the same effect. In this sense, myth was not separate from their craft, but an extension of it. By cultivating an aura of mystery, the shinobi enhanced their effectiveness. The fear of the unseen could paralyze opponents more effectively than any sword. Modern depictions, from comic books to films, have only amplified these legends. While often inaccurate, they reveal how enduring the figure of the shinobi has become. In many ways, the global fascination with ninja says more about contemporary desires for secrecy, power, and mystique than it does about historical reality. The legend of the shinobi has outgrown its origins, transforming into a universal symbol of hidden strength. Ultimately, the myth and reality of the shadow warriors cannot be separated entirely. Their historical practices created the foundation, while cultural imagination built the towering legend that endures today. Perhaps that is their greatest triumph, not the battles they fought or the missions they completed, but the fact that centuries later their presence still lingers in the imagination of the world. The shinobi, or ninja, are perhaps more famous today than they ever were in their own time. Over the centuries, their image has transformed from obscure spies and saboteurs into global cultural icons. Movies, video games, comic books, and even toys have all taken part in reshaping the memory of these shadow warriors. Yet this transformation is not just entertainment. It reveals how societies across the world continue to project their own fears, fantasies, and aspirations onto the figure of the ninja. One of the earliest influences on the modern perception of shinobi came from Japanese theater during the Edo period. As peace settled across Japan under Tokugawa rule, the practical need for espionage declined. In this vacuum, dramatists and playwrights filled the stage with stories of mysterious assassins who defied authority and used magical powers to outwit their enemies. Theatrical conventions, such as the black-clad stagehand suddenly revealing himself as a killer, laid the groundwork for the stereotypical ninja look that persists even now. These stage depictions exaggerated real espionage practices into something far larger than life, planting the seeds of myth that would flourish centuries later. In the 20th century, cinema became the next great force in spreading the ninja legend. Japanese films of the 1950s and 60s often portrayed shinobi as heroic rebels fighting corrupt warlords. These stories resonated with audiences who admired cunning and independence over brute strength. Western audiences soon picked up on the imagery, with the ninja becoming a fixture in martial arts films exported to Europe and America. By the 1980s, the ninja craze reached its height. Movies like Enter the Ninja and American Ninja presented them as exotic warriors, often blending fact and fantasy without distinction. Television and animation further solidified the ninja archetype. Japanese anime such as Naruto transformed shinobi into magical heroes, mixing historical references with fantasy powers. Meanwhile, franchises like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles turned them into family-friendly icons, cementing the idea of ninjas as adaptable symbols who could be both fierce and humorous. Video games followed suit, with titles like Shinobi, Ninja Gaiden, and Sekiro allowing players to embody the archetype of the silent assassin. These portrayals rarely concerned themselves with accuracy. What mattered was the atmosphere of stealth, danger, and mystique. What is striking is how the ninja figure has been reshaped to match cultural needs. In Japan, they often embody tradition, cunning, and rebellion against unjust authority. In the West, they became symbols of exotic danger and hidden power, tapping into fantasies of mastering secret skills. Over time, they have become less a historical figure and more a blank canvas onto which any culture can project its own desires. This flexibility explains why the shinobi myth continues to thrive, centuries after their practical role ended. The influence extends beyond entertainment. In business, ninja has become a metaphor for someone with specialized, almost superhuman skills, whether in technology, marketing, or finance. The word conveys mastery and adaptability, even if far removed from the historical figure. This linguistic evolution demonstrates how deeply embedded the concept has become in modern imagination. Yet there is also a growing movement in Japan to reclaim the historical shinobi from the haze of myth. Museums in Iga and Koga, former centers of ninja activity, present artifacts, documents, and training techniques in an effort to ground the legend in reality. Academic studies examine the role of espionage in feudal warfare, revealing that the truth, though less spectacular than the myths, is no less fascinating. These efforts highlight the tension between preserving the historical shinobi and embracing the cultural icon they have become. The modern fascination with shinobi reveals something timeless about human psychology. People are drawn to the idea of hidden strength, secret knowledge, and the ability to move unseen through the world. The ninja embodies both vulnerability and empowerment, the powerless figure who, through cunning, can humble the mighty. That archetype resonates across cultures and eras, ensuring that even if the historical shinobi fade into obscurity, their symbolic power will endure. In the end, the shinobi of modern imagination are not entirely divorced from their real counterparts. Just as their historical ancestors thrived on manipulating perception, today's cultural ninja continue to operate in the shadows of our minds. The legend remains, not because it is historically precise, but because it answers a deeper need, the need to believe in unseen possibilities, in the quiet power of those who walk unnoticed, and in the eternal allure of the shadow warrior. In Japanese history and imagination, few contrasts are as striking as that between the samurai and the shinobi. The samurai stood as the embodiment of honor, loyalty, and the rigid codes of Bushido, while the shinobi moved in the shadows, wielding deception, stealth, and sabotage. They were two sides of the same coin, each serving the same lords and the same wars, yet operating under very different philosophies of warfare. Exploring the tension between these archetypes reveals not just a cultural clash, but also deeper truths about how societies value both strength and subtlety. The samurai ideal revolved around open confrontation. They prized martial skill, bravery, and a willingness to fight face to face. Dueling traditions, highly ritualized battles, and the careful preservation of honor were seen as the marks of a true warrior. Even in times of war, the samurai ethos encouraged directness, announcing one's intent, identifying oneself before striking, and accepting death with dignity. The sword, the bow, and later the musket were their instruments, all wielded in the clear light of day. The shinobi, by contrast, thrived in ambiguity. Rather than confronting an enemy directly, they sought to weaken them from within. Espionage, intelligence gathering, sabotage of supplies, and assassination all fell within their sphere. To the samurai, such actions often appeared dishonorable. After all, if victory was gained not by skill on the battlefield but by poison in the night, what became of honor? Yet the shinobi saw things differently. For them, victory, survival of their lord or village, justified their methods. They were pragmatists, unconcerned with appearances so long as the mission was fulfilled. This philosophical divide created tension, but also interdependence. Samurai lords often employed shinobi when conventional warfare failed. A fortified castle could withstand sieges for months, but a single shinobi slipping through the walls to set fires or gather intelligence could break a stalemate. A proud general might disdain these methods, yet quietly rely on them when necessary. The result was a relationship both fraught and indispensable. Samurai represented the face of power, while shinobi embodied its hidden hand. Interestingly, the two were not always separate classes. Historical records suggest that many shinobi were themselves lower-ranking samurai, ronin, or villagers trained in espionage. The boundary between the two roles blurred depending on circumstance. A samurai who lost his master might turn to mercenary work as a shinobi. Likewise, a shinobi could, under the right patron, rise into samurai status. The tension, then, was as much ideological as social, with individuals moving between the worlds of honor and shadows. Cultural memory amplified the contrast. Chronicles and legends often depicted samurai as noble and shinobi as tricksters. Plays dramatized their differences, pitting honorable warriors against sly infiltrators. Over time, this narrative hardened, the samurai as the noble ideal, the shinobi as the cunning outsider. Yet this dichotomy obscures the reality that both were essential components of Japan's military machinery. Without the sword of the samurai and the dagger of their shinobi, many lords could not have maintained power. The contrast also mirrors broader themes in human conflict. Across cultures, societies have often elevated ideals of honorable combat, while simultaneously relying on espionage and deception. The knight and the spy, the soldier and the assassin, these pairs reveal a duality in warfare that transcends Japan. Honor may inspire warriors, but shadows often determine victory. In the end, the relationship between samurai and shinobi was not purely antagonistic, but complementary. Samurai provided the visible structure of authority, the proud face of war, while shinobi offered flexibility, secrecy, and the means to tip the balance in critical moments. Together, they reveal that power is never held by strength alone, but also by the unseen forces moving quietly beneath the surface. The tension between honor and shadows remains part of their lasting mystique. The samurai inspires with courage and discipline, while the shinobi fascinates with cunning and secrecy. In the interplay between these two archetypes lies the enduring drama of Japanese history, a reminder that both light and shadow are necessary to understand the full spectrum of human struggle. Though centuries have passed since samurai and shinobi walked the earth, their presence still lingers, woven into modern Japan's identity and projected across global culture. The age of sword and stealth is gone, but the shadow warriors have found a new life in stories, symbols, and even practices that resonate far beyond the battlefield. Their legacy proves that while empires rise and fall, the memory of warriors persists in ways more enduring than steel. In Japan, the samurai remain cultural icons. Statues and preserved castles celebrate their discipline and loyalty, while festivals reenact famous battles with armor, banners, and horseback demonstrations. The martial code of Bushido, though far removed from its original complex context, has been adapted into modern business and personal ethics. Honor, duty, and perseverance still inspire countless Japanese citizens, even if few today wield swords. The samurai's ideal has become shorthand for resilience and integrity. The shinobi, meanwhile, inhabit a different corner of memory. For centuries, their existence was downplayed or mythologized, whispered rather than honored in official history. Yet in modern times their image has flourished. From kabuki theater to contemporary manga, anime, and film, shinobi, more popularly known as ninja, have become global icons. Though exaggerated with magical powers and impossible feats, these portrayals capture something enduring about the allure of stealth and cunning. Where the samurai embodies duty, the shinobi represents freedom from rigid codes, the rebel who bends the rules to survive. Together, the twin legacies have influenced not only entertainment, but also disciplines of practice. Martial arts schools across Japan and abroad trace their philosophies back to samurai training methods. Swordsmanship, archery, and unarmed combat systems have been adapted into cultural arts rather than tools of war. Ninjutsu, once an obscure discipline, has been revived and taught worldwide, blending real historical techniques with reconstructed traditions. Students may not scale castle walls, but the mindset of adaptability, patience, and precision still draws followers. Their symbolism also stretches into unexpected places. Business leaders in Japan sometimes invoke the samurai spirit to encourage perseverance under pressure. Politicians and authors use the idea of shadow warriors to illustrate the importance of intelligence and strategy in global affairs. Even technology companies have borrowed their imagery, naming software tools, security systems, and robotics projects after ninja or samurai, evoking both strength and subtlety. Globally, the fascination has only grown. Western cinema, comics, and video games have reimagined samurai as stoic guardians and ninja as mysterious agents of chaos. While often divorced from their historical realities, these portrayals reveal a universal truth. Every society is drawn to the duality of honor and shadow, of visible strength and unseen influence. In many ways, samurai and shinobi have become archetypes far larger than their origins, transcending Japan to symbolize aspects of human nature itself. Yet perhaps the most enduring legacy lies in how they reflect human adaptability. The samurai remind us of the importance of principles, loyalty, and facing challenges directly. The shinobi remind us that survival sometimes requires flexibility, creativity, and quiet cunning. Both are necessary, both valid, and together they show that history is not a single narrative of honor or deception, but a tapestry of both. Modern Japan has embraced this duality with pride. Museums and heritage villages preserve the traditions of armor and weaponry. Tourist towns like Iga and Koka celebrate their shinobi heritage, complete with demonstrations and interactive exhibits. At the same time, global fascination ensures that new generations discover these figures not through dusty chronicles, but through stories, games, and cultural exports. The Shadow Warriors live on, not as relics, but as evolving symbols continually reinterpreted. In the end, the legacy of samurai and shinobi reveals more about humanity than about warfare. It shows our fascination with both order and chaos, strength and subtlety, light and shadow. The sword and the dagger, the code and the trick. These contrasts remind us that history is not only about battles fought, but about the ways those battles echo across centuries. Today, whether in a quiet dojo, a bustling video game arcade, or the imagination of a child watching their first samurai film, the spirit of the Shadow Warriors endures, shaping culture, inspiring creativity, and reminding us of the enduring power of stories. The story of the Shadow Warriors is not just about battles or codes, but about balance. The samurai, bound by honor and discipline, stood as guardians of tradition and order. The shinobi, slipping through the unseen paths, embodied adaptability and quiet survival. Together, they revealed two sides of the same human truth, that strength and cunning, loyalty and flexibility are all part of what it means to endure. Though centuries have passed, their presence still lingers. We see them in the stories we tell, the art we create, and the lessons we carry into our own lives. The way of the warrior and the way of the shadow remind us that history is not just a record of events, but a mirror reflecting who we are. In the stillness of night, their spirits remain silent, enduring, and forever walking between light and shadow.